Okay, we're going to get underway. Welcome, everybody. I am absolutely thrilled to have you all here to the Voices Leading Change, part of our No More Global Dialogue series during No More Week. I want to thank all of our panelists in advance. Survivors are at the center of our prevention work, and their voices, your voices, have to be heard loud and clear for us to be effective in this work. People often wonder if I am a survivor because I've been doing this work for a long time and I'm so committed to it. The truth is I'm not. And unfortunately, as many of you know, that makes me a little bit of an anomaly because so many people are getting hurt every day. But that's what's at the heart of the dedication, of my dedication. I want to end the hurt. And one of the best ways to do that is to create a groundswell and bring as many voices to the table as possible, because we're all impacted by the violence. We're all impacted by sexual assault, domestic violence, and we all need to join the chorus if we want to make change. Just a little bit about No More and the No More Foundation. No More is dedicated to ending domestic violence and sexual assault by increasing awareness, inspiring action, and fueling culture change. No More is a groundbreaking, which is funny for me to say as the founder, but it is. It's a groundbreaking global initiative comprised of the largest coalition, I have to read this, of nonprofits, corporations, government agencies, media, schools, and individuals, all dedicated to addressing domestic violence and sexual assault. We are committed to reaching and working with people from all communities, particularly those that are traditionally marginalized. Before we begin the session, I want to introduce Rosie Hidalgo, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Advisor on Gender-Based Violence, White House Gender Policy Council. We are thrilled to have you here with us today, Rosie. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Jane, for this invitation, for everyone at No More, for the amazing work you have been doing. And I was so excited to learn about how this work has really gone global as well. And just want to welcome all the participants who have joined us today, and most of all, the survivors who will be on this panel. As Jane said, survivors are very much at the heart of this movement. I've been involved in the movement to end domestic violence and sexual assault for almost 30 years. And it is such a pivotal aspect of this work, is to center the voices of survivors in being able to improve their response, but even more so to work towards prevention. So thanks for the honor to be with you here today. And just want to bring and lift up what an important commitment and priority this is for President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. In fact, on International Women's Day last year, they created the first ever White House Gender Policy Council. That has not existed before. And the president signed that executive order yesterday. On International Women's Day was our 1-year anniversary. And it really is a commitment throughout this administration to advance gender equity, equality. And we were with putting out our nation's first ever national strategy on gender equity and equality that was released last October after a lot of consultation with civil society and all the agencies who are a part of this Gender Policy Council to really advance those goals. And it lists 10 key priorities. But one of those is working to prevent and end gender-based violence. And other priorities around economic security, access to healthcare, human rights, all of those we know are so intertwined. They are interconnected with this goal we all share. And as you stated, Jane, how do we do this work in a very intersectional way, recognizing those who also face other forms of oppression or traditional marginalization, whether it's individuals in the LGBTQ plus community, those who are immigrants, those who have disabilities, and really just across a range of issue areas, center the resilience, the courage, the opportunity for all of us to join together and make sure that everyone has a right to live a life free from abuse, free from violence. And as you know, for President Biden, this has been a lifelong commitment. As the original author of the Violence Against Women Act and a champion for the past 30 years, I am happy to say that just yesterday, it looks like the Senate bipartisan bill that we've been working on to renew and strengthen the Violence Against Women Act is going to get across the finish line in the coming days. It will be coming to the president for his signature. So that's a result of all of you, of the voices of survivors, of advocates, of communities coming together. And what's interesting about the Violence Against Women Act, it's not just reauthorizing it, it's always how do we strengthen it? How do we improve it? How do we recognize the progress that's been made, but recognize that we still have a lot further to go? And something that No More is all about, it's about the social norm change, the culture change. That's the critical component. And we've also been tasked with developing our nation's first ever national action plan on gender-based violence, realizing that while VAWA is an important piece of legislation, we need a much more holistic, also public health-centered response, and really a lot more on prevention. That has come up time and again with all the listening sessions we have been doing. How do we get everyone involved in really helping to prevent and end gender-based violence? So again, it's an honor to be with all of you today as we commemorate Women's History Month and in honor of International Women's Day. I want to especially thank the tremendous leadership, courage, resilience of survivors who lead this work, and I look forward to listening to you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosie. That was really, really inspiring. No one has been more of a champion than President Biden on these issues. And this idea of a national action plan on gender-based violence is really exciting. It's just his commitment to this issue is really unparalleled, and it's I'm very glad he has people like you helping him work on this now. Now I want to turn the session over to a colleague, Melissa Moorbeck. She's the Director of Partnerships at No More, and she's going to moderate the panel with our panelists, with our guests. Melissa?
Thank you, Jane, very much, and welcome everyone to our session today. Really, we will be discussing today with a unique group of women, really to take a look at a survivor-led perspective on prevention. And as we've heard from both Jane and Rosie, to end the hurt and to create social change and normative change by listening to the voices of survivors. I would like to introduce, and it is my distinct honor to introduce, Leslie Morgan Steiner, author, consultant, and thought leader. Mildred Muhammad, author, award-winning advocate, and transformational leader. And artist, FKA Twigs. Welcome to our discussion today. Each of the women joining us today are phenomenal women and truly inspiring. Each of us is a survivor of abuse and so much more. We all share a perspective and a bond, a connection which we will explore, and almost an unspoken language that no one can ever take away from us. Many of us listening to or viewing our discussion may reflect on our own experiences and wish to seek support and help. Please reach out to the resources listed on the No More Global Directory, which is being put in the chat section for you now. We will show this to you again at the end of our discussion. Remember, you are never alone, and there is no shame in what we experience. If you would like to ask a question, please do so by listing it in the chat box for our Q&A portion, which we will get to after we ask some really great questions today. Again, we are framing today around questions that will dive into how survivors' voices help us get to changing how we create strategies for prevention. And I'd like to start with one which I asked of all of our colleagues today on the call or on our panel. And I'd like to open the discussion with a question for each panelist. What is the one thing that you wish you knew that may have helped you and what you experienced? And this isn't about victim blaming, but this is about what did you wish you knew? This is more about what was it in our collective experience that you would like to share today if you look back. And I'd like to start with Leslie, please.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be on this panel and to be talking about such a difficult subject. When I became a victim of abuse, I was 22 and I had just graduated from Harvard College. And I think what I wish that I knew was that it is never a victim's fault. I knew nothing about abuse and violence against women. And I really had internalized our cultural bias that that victims somehow want it or deserve it because they have low self-esteem and they're not very well educated and they don't have the strength to leave. And it's all incredibly victim blaming, all of our stereotypes about abuse. And I wish I had known that it isn't a victim's fault. And I also wish that I had known how seductive and charming abusers can be at the beginning. And I think if I had known more about abuse, I think I still might have become a victim because it's such a powerful charm offensive that you're targeted. But I think I would have left far earlier if I knew the red flags and the warning signs, if I had a much greater awareness of what abuse is really like.
Thank you, Leslie. Twigs, what do you think?
Hi. I think I wish that I would have known some of the language that I know now that would help me recognize the signs of abuse, love bombing, gaslighting, mystification, just the way that the cycle works, like you said, Leslie, the charm offensive and then dragging you off to the bottom, but then they're the only person that can put you back on top to drag you off. You know, I think I found it once I started to really research abusers' tactics. I found it very alarming how similar abusers are in terms of the skills that they have to really trap their victims. And now I've learned the language, I feel not only can I reflect back on my own experience and understand it more and feel more grounded in myself, but I feel like it's also helped me speak to other survivors and help them understand as well. And I was speaking to one of my friends who is a survivor the other day, and I said, like, you should go and Google what a smear campaign is, because a smear campaign is something when the abuser feels like they're losing control, they can go and destroy the survivor's reputation, which can leave a survivor feeling more isolated and more like they can't get out. So then she went and Googled smear campaign and she was like, yes, that's what I'm going through right now. And so, yeah, for me, it's the language and just having these conversations and helping people understand the tactics and be able to label them when they see them.
Thank you, Twigs and Leslie. And Mildred, what are your thoughts on this? Oh, you're on mute, Mildred. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay. I wish someone would have explained to me how thin the line is between love and hate. Mm-hmm. Maya Angelou says, when someone is showing you who they are, believe them the first time. Well, we are in tune with our partner and we want to be in a relationship. We didn't sign up to be abused. We signed up to be loved. We wanted to have this relationship in order to feel love and to share love. Mm-hmm. Had I known how thin that line was and to really digest when the abuse started, because my abuse was not physical. My abuse was verbal, emotional, psychological, stalking, and financial. So when you feel within yourself that someone is crossing the line, I call them spider senses. You'll feel that. And that is your first sign, because a lot of people's signs are different. If you were raised in a household where there's turmoil and abuse, then your level of pain is different from someone who hasn't experienced that. And so if you find yourself looking online about what is domestic abuse, what is domestic violence, you're in an abusive relationship. Those are your signs. Everybody's signs are different. So had I known that how thin that line was between love and hate, then perhaps I would have understood my position.
I think that is what each of you have contributed is so very important about what is that thin line between love and hate. And Leslie, what you were saying about how seductive and how charming, and that it's never the victim's fault. And Twigs, when you were mentioning about the whole concept of tactics and switching it really from a victim perspective to an empowerment perspective. And what you shared, Mildred, around if you're asking the question, you're there. For me, I think it was very difficult for people to understand that, like Leslie, having gone to Harvard and really been born in by virtue of my privilege, that this could happen to me, and why are you talking about it? And they didn't believe that it could have happened. The first lawyer I went to, and I handed him pictures and I was still in a shelter, said to me, "How do I know you didn't ask for it?" Things have changed, but have they really? And no, this isn't about me, but it's really important that victims' voices are heard when we're talking about prevention. You talked about tactics and strategy. And I think one of the things, as we continue to look at this, the next question I'd like to ask is around what resources did you try and what was the response? And I'd like to start with Twigs, if I could.
I called an abuse hotline that I just Googled in desperation. And there was a lady on the phone, and she asked me, maybe like 5 to 10 questions about the experiences that I was going through. And she said to me, "Okay, well, based on what you've said, you've ticked every single box of abuse. And so I need to ask you, are you safe? Can you go somewhere safe? Do you need help getting somewhere safe? What's your situation right now?" And I was really shocked, actually, because I think that I had been gaslit so much to believe that the things that were happening to me weren't that bad and that it was my fault. But when it was a stranger on the other end of the line that didn't know anything about my music or who I was or anything, you know, when it was just the facts of my experiences and the boxes that it ticked off, almost not in a cold way, but very like practically, you know, just like this has happened, that has happened, this has happened, and that I was at high risk of not being safe. And just the concern in her voice, can you get somewhere safe? Is there somewhere that you can go? I just felt, I felt so shocked, and it was a real turning point in terms of, wow, I need to get out. And at that point, I actually knew that I couldn't get out because my mental health wasn't in a place where I could. And so the second resource that I used, which I'm very lucky to have been able to afford, was I think I had therapy.
Yes.
For a few months to help me leave. And I had therapy like once or twice a week, and I would call my therapist if things got bad out of hours, and just having that support there really gave me the courage and the mental strength that I needed to get out. But I also know that I was really lucky to be able to afford that, and that was the reason why I wanted to come forward about my story, because I found it incredibly hard. And
yes,
I'm a successful artist, so if I found it so hard, I imagine what it's like for women that don't have the financial resources or are dependent on their abuser for shelter, or have children, or are not in work right now, and all these things. So yeah, I think those are the two resources that I used, and even then it was really, really difficult and challenging, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done in the whole of my life, really, even with those resources.
And I'm just going to interject here. It's also the thing, this leaving is like a rebirth for you, and is a new birthday for you. And it's not about leaving at all. It's about what you did to get that strength to honor yourself. And we so often don't talk about the mental health support that we need, or what we've walked.
Yeah, of course. And, I always say, like, I'm not an expert. I can only really talk about it from what I've learned going through it. For me, leaving in many ways was the start of the journey, because then it's also the staying away, having the strength to stay away despite being reached out to, or despite, the attempts of being lured back in. I think for me, in some ways, the sort of 6 months after, just the way that my brain was, I just wasn't prepared for me to feel that way. And again, it just goes back to just the knowledge. Often survivors have been put in a state of such anxiety. For me, like, my cortisol was all over the place. Like, when I left, like, I would just get these spikes of fear and anxiety and panic attacks and not sleeping for months. And I don't think anybody really talks about that. Just the stress, even when you're not in the relationship anymore, like the shadow effect and the way that it lingered on in my life for many months was just as painful in many ways. So again, to be able to have the resources of therapy, or, I'm lucky enough that I was able to go back to my home and sort of bunker down and spend time by myself. But yeah, I know that a lot of people don't have that privilege, and it is truly, for me anyway, it was truly devastating to look at my life and how it was in tatters after I left was really shocking as well.
Thank you for that, and for sharing that. I think it's so important that we look at that shadow effect in prevention. There are days 32 years later that something will happen, and there is that moment, and we don't talk about it at all. Mildred, I'd like to come to you with this concept as well of what resources did you try? What was the response? What could we do better? It's a big question.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. So I did not have physical scars. 80% of victims do not have physical scars to prove that they are victims. And I fell into that category. And because I didn't have the scars, my help was either slow or none in coming. I remember a PSA. I was in Washington State. They don't have PSAs on TV anymore. That was a PSA giving you all of the list of abuses that you could be suffering and a number to call. I remember calling the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and I remember talking to a young lady. She was asking me all of the questions, and she asked me, could I come in? And I said, no, I have 3 children. He has all the money. I can't move. And I didn't call them back. I did not, because I felt the only option that they gave me was to leave, and that was not an option for me at that time.
Sure.
I appreciated the information that they gave, but it really escalated after I got a restraining order. I got a lifetime restraining order. I don't even know if they give those out anymore. Went to the judge. He said, you got to get away from this guy, which is why he gave me the lifetime restraining order. However, they had to include visitation.
Yes.
If I'm getting a restraining order, then why is there visitation? Visitation, he took the children on a weekend visitation and was gone. I have 3. Nobody helped me. No organization. Police said he had as much a right to the children as I did. I went to the governor. They wanted to put me in jail because my children were not in the system. They brought forth the Becca bill. And if your children are not in school, they put you in jail for that. And I explained to them what happened. And they said, well, when you find your children, just make sure they're back in school. I had to go to the shelter because he took all the money out of the account, passed out, ended up at the shelter, couldn't go outside because I knew it was going to be a headshot. He said, you have become my enemy, and as my enemy, I will kill you. I knew it would be a headshot. Didn't go outside. Called the police. They said there's nothing they could do. Called the detective. He said, it's not my job. It's the police job.
Yes.
Nobody helped me to find my children. It wasn't when I got over here in Maryland, went to the FBI. They wanted to put me in the middle of a parking lot to use me as a decoy to find my children. I tried every resource that was available because I didn't have the physical scars. Some told me because I was Black, I'm not going to get the resources that I need. I believe it was every avenue that you could go through where you was not getting the help that you need. I probably found it because one police officer or detective told me that I fell in a ditch. You didn't fall in a hole, Ms. Muhammad, you fell in a ditch, and nobody threw you a lifeline to help you. The one time they did listen is after they caught John and they put me in protective custody.
Yes.
And what a lot of people don't know, and this is the importance of restraining orders. I know some people say that it's a waste of paper, and it's not a security or bulletproof vest. However, when they caught John, they had nothing to hold him on. They had to release him in 48 hours. It was a sheriff in the Maryland area that found my restraining order in Tacoma, Washington, because the Tacoma Police Department did not put my restraining order in the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center. He put my restraining order in that system. That is why they were able to hold him, because he violated my restraining order.
This is that voice, that testimony. What you are sharing is that key. Then we listen to the part of prevention of what we have to hear. That
restraining order is important. Don't feel like it's not, because if they would not have had that 48 hours later, they would have had to let him go.
Yes.
And he would have come and killed me because he found me. And one of the reasons the foreman said the reason why they gave him the death penalty is because they didn't want him to finish what he started, which was to kill Mildred Muhammad. So that whole DC sniper incident, that was a domestic violence, child custody issue. But they would not have been able to get the death penalty had they included what happened with me and my children. So our case still has not been settled in the judicial system. And so whatever resources that you feel you need, find them, But always remember, as a victim of domestic violence, a survivor of domestic violence, nobody will fight for you more than you. Learn the laws in your area. Your advocates can only go so far, and then the rest of that is up to you. Find out the language that you need to insert in a restraining order. Find out the laws in your state in order for you to be educated on what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot say in a restraining order, because they've changed the language of how it is to be reported. Mm-hmm. And police officers give the media the narrative on what they are to report to the public. So yes, they didn't tell the public that I was the intended target, because they didn't want anyone to know that part. They didn't want it to be a domestic violence issue that is going to be reported worldwide. It was just two men in a car shooting people to put $10 million on a stolen credit card.
I think that's important that you're bringing that up, and I'm not minimizing that, because what you're bringing forward for us in our prevention work is the lens at which we look at this, but also the lens at which different institutions look at that, and the myriad kaleidoscope of what is abuse, so that the way it is named, not named, all of the intricacies of custody of children. Leslie brought up something really important about how this affects children when we were speaking before we started. Really what's going on. And thank you for sharing that. I'd like to turn to Leslie now and think about this as well, whether you'd like to share about what resources you did try, what was the result, but really, what are some of the effective prevention tools that you think we need to be looking at now?
So this is a wonderful question. And just like everything with abuse, the answer is pretty complicated.
Yes.
And what really motivates me to speak out as a victim, and what drove me to write my memoir, Crazy Love, and to do my TED Talk on Why Victims Stay, is to get other people to understand what it feels like to be abused, because it's not what people think. Abuse is a psychological, physical, financial, often geographic trap that's disguised as love. And it feels like love to you as the victim, even though just about everybody else on the outside can see that it's not love, that it's abuse. And as a result, the resource that I needed the most was honesty and truth about what I was going through, because I was blind to it. But the real paradox here is that nobody could tell me the truth about what they saw unless I revealed to them what I was going through. And I was really deeply committed, ironically, to protecting my abuser. I thought I was the strong one. I thought I was a strong, smart, independent woman in love with a troubled man. And I was going to be the one woman who took care of him and never abandoned him. So I wasn't going to tell my friends or my family or the sheriff who lived 2 houses away that this man was holding loaded guns to my head every night and pushing me downstairs and humiliating me and degrading me on an almost daily basis, because I knew he would get in trouble. And I wanted the abuse to end, but I didn't want the relationship to end. So the resource that I needed the most was the truth. And I needed to break the silence to get that. And I needed people around me to break the silence to me. And what helped me the most was somebody in my life who, instead of storming into my life and saying, "You're an abuse victim, you have no self-esteem, he's a monster, let's get you out of here, let's rescue you." Instead of that, he just said to me, "Something has changed since you've been in this relationship. And I care about you, and I need to know that you're okay. And I need you to know that I'm here for you." And that shattered my denial, because he was holding up a mirror to me about what was really going on, and that I wasn't fooling anybody, and that I was losing myself bit by bit. And that helped me so much. And that was the same thing that helped me after the final beating, when I was sure that my husband was going to kill me. And I finally broke the silence myself and called the police. They came and they held up a mirror to my life too. And they said, he will kill you if you let him come back. We see this all the time. And we'll find you dead here on your own living room floor. So those people who had the bravery and the knowledge to tell me the truth about what I was going through, that's the resource that I needed the most. I had hotlines, I had police around me, I had friends and family. During the times when I was being abused and beaten, I could have reached out to those resources. There wasn't anything lacking in the resources. What I needed was somehow a way to break through the invisible trap that I was in. And I think that comes from awareness, from greater awareness in our society about what victims really go through, greater compassion for victims, and a commitment to not rescuing victims, not pitying them, but giving them honesty about what they are really going through. And it's a very, very tricky and often dangerous thing to do. And the only way we get there is by breaking the silence about abuse, by victims who are able to speak out like we are speaking out today and saying, hey, this is really what abuse looks like. It's not something that happens. They don't hit you on the first date.
No.
They're not monsters quite often. When we first meet them, we wouldn't fall in love with them and be vulnerable to them if they were. And that it's not a drunken, horrible person who anybody would be an idiot to be with. These are often very charming, seductive, sympathetic characters who, because we're big-hearted, we fall for them and we become blind to what they're doing to us. That, to me, is what really happens in abuse. And the more people who understand that in our society, the faster victims can break through their own denial and break the silence and get the help that we need.
I think it's critical you're bringing that up, and that idea of that invisible trap and honesty. I'd like to ask a few questions. Really around some specifics about what we've shared today. And I'd like to start with Mildred. And you mentioned that you'd like us at No More to include in our content that victims and survivors don't have to change or don't have physical scars to prove their abuse. I'd like to add that it is often the physical scars go away, and it is that cognitive coercive control that haunts us. And people often think that we're weak, but we're stronger than people realize. Just interjecting there, oops. You state that it's time to change the narrative from asking victims, why do you stay, to asking abusers, why do you abuse? Can you explore a little bit of that for us?
Yes, ma'am. When you ask a victim, why do you stay? That's a victim blaming question, number one. But you're also putting the total responsibility of the abusive relationship on the victim, as if she left, then the victim would no longer be abused, which is probably true. However, it is the abuser's fault that abuse is in the relationship to begin with. So whereas you are afraid to ask the abuser, why do you abuse? When asking the victim that, you're putting me on defense so that I can explain to you or give you a really good reason why I'm staying there. I should not have to defend the abuse in my relationship. You should be asking the abuser and hold him or her accountable for the abuse. We have to change that narrative, because the more you ask a victim, why do you stay, the more she's trying or he tries to figure out, now what answer can I give that would possibly change your mind to help me out of this situation.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't have to defend that at all to anyone. And we have to stop asking those questions. I know we're afraid of the abuser, but the victims are too. If we would listen to the victims, then the abuser would be held accountable. The reason why, I'm sorry, I don't remember the first part of what you said.
No, you were wondering how is it that we can make this shift?
Right. So 80% of victims do not have physical scars to prove that they're victims. And I'm gonna bring up the situation with Miss Rihanna and Chris Brown. Before there were pictures, they only talked about, they really blamed her for that relationship. They blamed her for everything that was happening to him, as if he has no responsibility or is unable to make a decision on whether or not to abuse. It is a choice that abusers make to abuse the people that they claim to love. Once
Yes.
the pictures came out, that's when everybody got on board, which tells you we are a visual society. If I don't see your scars, then your scars do not exist. Therefore, you are not a victim. So I'm not going to treat you that way until I see the scars, the bloody lip, the black eyes, the strangulation, the marks on your neck. Then I'm not going to treat you that way. All you're doing, you're trying to bring a good man down. You're trying to make sure that everybody looks bad at this person when all you had to do was leave. Well, why won't you go to the abuser and ask them, why do they feel entitled to terrorize the people in their own household? Of course, yes. We know that most abusers are narcissists. So they appear to be one way in the public and a different way at home. So the people in public don't know the person that comes home. So therefore, just believe me when I say these things to you so that I can get the help that I need. That's a touch test that victims do. I'm going to test to see the people around me really believe me or believe the abuser. So when I ask you, John is not treating me this way and I don't know what to do. And your response is, well, he wouldn't do that. You automatically took the side of the abuser. It happens just that quickly. And so I'm not going to talk to you about it. I'm not going to tell you everything now because I'm afraid you're going to go back to him or her and tell them what I did. And then the abuse is going to be worse than what it was because I had the courage to speak out, but you didn't believe me enough to help me. You believed me to go and tell the abuser so that he or she could make the adjustments to their behavior.
So part of the prevention message that you're sharing with us today is not only holding the abuser accountable and for their actions, but also believing what we are saying and those nuances. Very powerful, Mildred. Twigs, I'd like to come to you. And you are someone in the public eye. And my question is, do you think the arts and popular culture can and should become more of a force for positive change? And if so, how? Oh, there we go. I think you're on mute, dear. There we go.
I think that one thing that I found before I came out was that the project that I was working on with my abuser was more important than what I was going through. And I had tried to give out signals to people on the project to say what I was going through. And I was on one occasion told not to tell my manager. I'd said that I felt that I needed to speak to my manager because everything was getting really out of control. And I was told that I was being ridiculous, was the word that was used. It was ridiculous if I did that. And that there was a film festival coming up and that I should just go and do that. And I really felt put in my place. And I felt at that time that if I would have had the support and been listened to, I would have got out then before things got really bad. And that's like part of the reason why I wanted to come forward really and talk about it, because often in my industry, when you're doing a movie or an album or a show, it's like that's the most important thing. And there's that thing that the show must go on, and there's so much money involved in it, and you're so lucky to have a seat at the table. So everyone just like shut up and put up and just get the job done. And I think I really felt that pressure. And now it's so wrong. You know, I sit here now a year or two later, and I think I was made to feel that a film was more important than my safety and more important than, you know, just stopping everything and throwing it all in and just sorting out what was happening at the time. I do feel that things are changing and things have changed. And I hope in me coming forward that it has been a small part of that. I think in terms of the film and music industry, it's just a thing, what am I trying to say, that no amount of money and no amount of fame and no amount of a big project or no amount of someone's reputation or any of these things are more important than somebody's safety, which seems like a very obvious thing to say, but you'd be very surprised. Actually, you'd be very surprised, and I think what I went through is an example of that. But as I said, I do think things are changing, and I do hope in us having these conversations and in people coming forward that there's more of a platform and more of a understanding of ways to tackle these issues now.
Twigs, what you're saying is so powerful, and what you're sharing is so powerful. Your voice has created change. Each of us on this, in this session, as we're talking, you know, we're going to go away at the end of this, and we're all going to be like, ooh, what did I say? But we're also going to feel a little bit vulnerable. And maybe the people listening might feel vulnerable too. But remember, it is our voices. It is our truth that changes the world. And I don't just say that. What you have shared has changed how people do look at this. As you were saying, when you talk about spider senses and the smear campaign, how often does it have to be business as usual before a human life is more important than just being seen as a commodity? Thank you. Leslie, I'd like to turn to you, and I'm sort of going off piste here, but it was something you mentioned when we, before we started our conversation today. And I want to take this as a survivor and as looking at this through the lens of prevention. How do we talk to children? And I wish we had 10 hours for 365 days a year for 100 years to have this conversation. But I really would like your insights on this, of how do we talk to children?
I think that this is a really important point to bring up. And so often violence against women gets labeled and marginalized as a quote unquote woman's issue. And it's very important to remember that an enormous number of children are affected by family violence every year. They witness it and they are victims of it. And many of the victims as children grow up to be perpetrators as adults. And so it's really critical to to talk openly about abuse so that children can confide if they're being abused, and that they can be aware that it's happening and that it's not anything to be ashamed of. So it's kind of like talking to kids about their sexuality. The key is to just keep it really simple. Just a few sentences about what abuse is. If you are an abuse victim, or if you know somebody, or if there's somebody in the media who's been abused, to just explain that that person was attacked and hurt, and that you can't stay in a relationship where somebody hurts you. I would add on to this that in addition to talking to children about this, we have got to shift the focus to where it belongs, which is on men. Because men commit the vast majority of violence, all violence, but particularly violence against women. And this isn't a women's issue, it's a men's issue. And by not talking about the perpetrators and by not blaming them, all of us have seen this, that they get a pass. John Muhammad got a certain kind of pass. My abuser got a certain kind of pass. Everybody's does. Because instead of saying, and it's a language problem, which is interesting because it was a thing that Twigs opened with, which is the importance of understanding language. We have what's called an invisible perpetrator problem here, is that we say, she was raped. I was a victim of domestic violence. And we've got to say, my husband abused me. My friend from math class raped me. We have to stop ignoring the fact that it's men doing this. And I would love so much in terms of prevention to see a panel of men talking about when they turned a blind eye to it. All the times they said, well, he's my friend. I don't think he could do that. When they just have no idea what they're talking about. And that is, to me, that's one of the next frontiers, is really shifting the spotlight. As Mildred said, instead of saying, why did you stay? We've got to say, why on earth would any man hurt a woman or child who loves him? Why would they do that? What is wrong with men in our society that they're encouraged to do that and allowed to do it? That's how we're really going to end abuse.
Thank you, Leslie. And these are critical as we look for prevention and as we talk to our children, but also when we are looking at the next stages of this work. And you've thrown the gauntlet down. And no more week 2023, maybe this is something that we will tackle and move forward. And I would do it with all of you present and to help us move this forward. We have time for just one very short, brief response from each of you. I'm very sorry that time is escaping us. We have gone over our 45 minutes, but this is a vital conversation. What's one small piece of advice or message to people hearing us or watching us today would you wish to share? Leslie, I'll start with you.
So I think that the knee-jerk reaction when you think somebody is being abused or is a victim is to respond with anger and a demand for immediate action. Anger often at the perpetrator, but sometimes anger at the victim too for staying. And then a desire to rescue the victim. Leave now, let me help you, I'll come get you right now. And I just want to say to people out there that those two things, although really understandable, do not help victims. Because we're often in such a fragile state that we take all of those messages as being that we're idiots for being in love with somebody who has been abusing us. We're idiots for becoming so vulnerable. And instead, it's much more valuable to educate yourself about the dynamics of abuse, to become really aware of it, and to treat victims with compassion and credulity, to believe them, and to understand that this is a psychological trap disguised as love, and that anybody, no matter your income, your education level, the color of your skin, your background, how many children you have, that anybody can become vulnerable, and that we are your sister, your mother, your daughter, and that compassion and awareness is what's really going to help us the most.
Thank you, Leslie. And Mildred, what is that one small piece of advice that you would give or that you want to share? And you might want to take it off mute.
Okay. So the one piece of advice I would ask is, if you know someone that is a victim of domestic violence, I just ask you to do these things. First, set up your boundaries. Understand what you will do, what you won't do, and what you can't do. If you have a significant other, talk to them about your friend or your family member that's in an abusive relationship and that you have a desire to help. Take that person to lunch, not dinner, because their time is checked. If you go over the time for dinner, then they may be subject to abuse when they get home. Take them to lunch. We already know everybody's out and about now, so we can do that. Once you sit down, small talk is there. Don't ask the victim, why do you stay? Ask them this one question, because nobody asks the victim this. Because you have your boundaries in check, you already know what you can do. Ask them, how can I help you? That is the most empowering question you can ask a victim. I already know I'm a victim of domestic violence. I already know I'm in a situation I can't get out of. I want to leave. I just don't know how. You asking me that question lets me know that you love me enough to ask and is willing to help. Now you may say, well, Mildred, I don't want to get involved. If you don't want to get involved, that's fine. Give them a resource, give them a phone number, give them a website, give them something that they can use in order to get out of it. Now the victim may look at you kind of strange because nobody asks the victim that. Just let them know, hey, you don't have an answer right now, call me, we'll work it out. I'm ready to help you. But don't ever put yourself in harm's way trying to help your friend or victim. When you see that it's getting volatile, call the police because they're trained to do that. They're trained to help.
Thank you very much, Mildred. Very important question. And it's not patronizing, it's being honest and seeking help. And Twigs, I'd like to close our session by asking you this same question about advice or the message that you would like to share today.
Well, I think that it's important to acknowledge that the victim knows their abuser best. So if the victim is worried that this might happen or that might happen, it's because it's probably happened before or it's been hinted at happening. So it's important, even if it seems like ridiculous, that if they're worried that their abuser's gonna break into where they're staying, or that's because that's past experience and that's probably true. And then the other thing I just say is that sometimes it can be, well, I can only talk from my own experience, but sometimes I felt very ashamed when I would reach out to my friends and I'd say, I've gone through this, I want to get out. And then I would find myself backing out of the situation. And then I would find that it would make me feel more isolated because I'd be scared to ask for help again. So I think just to know that it is going to take a few times. I think on average, it takes survivors 8 times to leave their abusers. So the people that I tended to stay in touch with were people that greeted me with no judgment. There were many times where I would text people in the middle of the night, I'm in trouble, I need to go somewhere now, can you help me? And someone would say, yes, come now. And then I would just disappear. And then I'd feel so embarrassed the next day that I would end up losing friends over it because I'd feel so ashamed, like I couldn't leave then. And now I need help again. And I'd feel like I let my friend down somehow, and so I think it does take a few times. And I think as long as you let your friend know, if you think that they're in an abusive relationship, that you're there for them if they manage to leave, and you're also there for them if they can't leave right now and they have to stay. Like that was so helpful to me. So yeah, I think those 2 things would be pieces of advice that I would give.
Thank you, Twigs. Thank you to each of our panelists today for this amazing conversation. I'm sorry we haven't had time to go to the wonderful questions that have been posted. I would like to turn this over to Pamela Zabala, Global CEO of the No More Foundation. And before I do, while she turns off the mute button, my contribution would be It took me a long time to learn that there's no shame in being alive, in living a happy life, and in saying, I am a person. I am more than what happened to me, and I will never forget what happened, but I will raise my voice to create change, just as we did in the Join the Chorus campaign we did earlier this year. So over to my colleague and friend, Pamela.
Thank you so much for such a powerful discussion that we just had this hour. It's been amazing to hear your stories, and I know that the impact it will have to with many people that are hearing you right now. As Melissa said, there were many questions that came through. We replied some of them as best as we could, but we will make sure that information is available, and many of them were also answered throughout the conversation. At No More, we know that prevention works. We know that getting the message out helps many people. It's one of those things where you grab seeds, you throw them out, and you don't know who will tomorrow see that poster, hear this conversation, and how many lives are we actually helping at the moment. So we just need to carry on this path and make sure, as you were saying, getting out the message, communicating, giving advice. Thank you again to all the panelists, again, for going deep, sharing with us, for being our friends at No More, and supporting No More Week, but also to everybody who joined today, who have actually stayed much more time than planned, and are here with us today. We appreciate your support, and we'll carry on the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. What a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.